everyone. Welcome to the Embodied Spirituality podcast, where we talk about reconstructing after deconstruction. I am your host, Hailey Mitsui, and I'm very excited to share today's conversation with you. This is a podcast that was really birthed out of the trends that I saw in my private practice and spiritual direction, of people leaving kind of organized religion, leaving more fundamentalist theologies, and really not knowing how to rebuild after we have all sort of parsed away all the things we don't believe anymore. How do we figure out what we do believe? The podcast is called Embodied Spirituality because for me, that journey has been a returning to the self and returning to the body as that sort of core place of where this new and more restorative and more supportive and liberative theology can come out of. And so before we even get into our conversation today, I would love for us to do a short practice together. And this, we're just going to do a little bit of what's called orienting. And orienting is just intentionally bringing your awareness to the surroundings around you. So whether that's with your eyes, noticing what you see, maybe it's your ears, noticing what you hear. It could be your nose, noticing what you smell, or even your tongue, noticing what you taste, or your hands, your skin, your sit bones, noticing what you're sitting on, or noticing how the air feels on your bare skin. And so just taking a moment here now to notice, maybe letting your eyes wander around the space, or letting your ears hear a little bit more in the distance than they're used to doing. That's a practice that you can engage in anytime. Anytime you want to return into the present moment, to support your nervous system a little bit if it's over activated, or just to create a little bit of rest and reprieve. Now that we are connected a little bit more to our bodies, and a little bit more to our environment and this moment, I want to share a little bit about today's conversation. I had the great enjoyment to talk to David Gate. He is a poet and a writer, a visual artist that originally comes from London, UK, but now resides in the midst of the ancient Blue Ridge Mountains in Asheville, North Carolina. His work centers around care for the individual and the nurture of community. And these values are so clear in the conversation that we had that really traversed a lot of territory. But so much of it, I think, can be captured in this journey and relationship that we have with trust and trusting ourselves, as well as enjoyment, pleasure, and desire, and what role those have to play in our lives and our spiritualities, and our relationship to suffering. David, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
Yeah, I'm so glad to get to meet you. Just as you logged on was kind of our first introduction to each other. I follow you on Instagram, as many people do, and have felt really moved and seen and compelled by the poetry that you put out into the world. And so I'm really grateful to.
Thank you. Yeah, I've been a follower. I think I followed you before you followed me.
Oh, that's how I found out about you. Yeah. I was like, who's this poet guy?
Yeah, so I found out about your work through Brandy Miller, and really everyone that Brandy recommends I end up following because she's such a great curator of intelligent, smart, funny people. So
she is.
Yeah. And she was not wrong.
Oh, wow. Wow. Thank you so much. I would love to hear a little bit about maybe this spiritual tradition that you come from, or a starting point. We obviously moved through a lot of, but like, what would you kind of say was that maybe first language of spirituality that you have?
So I grew up in the Anglican Church in London, in England, and the Anglican Church is a very broad communion. It contains very conservative, almost Catholic expressions, right the way to incredibly progressive and liberal expressions of Anglican faith. And so the kind of wing that I grew up in was the charismatic Anglican wing. So very heavily influenced by the Vineyard Church.
Yeah.
And charismatic practices. So we would sing in tongues and we would prophesy, and we didn't do any snake handling. But
I only just learned about this.
No, we would joke about this in England. We would be like, haha, snake handling. And then when I moved to America, I realized that, oh shit, that's real. Like, people do that in the South. Like, it's nuts down there. And so, so that's the tradition I grew up in, and had really my, Sunday school experiences as a kid, drawing pictures of Moses and other people with sandals and beards, and then had like my own experiences of God as a teenager, primarily through worship and prayer, through our kind of charismatic expressions. And that was what awoke in me something that made it my own, and not just like my parents' faith or my cultural faith. So, and I kind of dove, I'm a creature of devotion, so I kind of dove all the way in, and really developed my own faith and my own practices alongside those that were being taught to me. I would spend hours and hours in my bedroom as a teenager, worshipping and lighting candles and reading the Bible and praying and deep meditating. I didn't even know that that's what it was, really. I was just doing what I wanted to do. But those were incredibly formative spiritual experiences, private experiences, and then the public ones, in our worship gatherings. And so that's where it started for me.
And has it felt like your faith and spiritual practices have really evolved and supported as you've changed and grown as a human? Or was there ever like a breaking point of like, I don't know if this is going to work for me anymore?
No, for me, it has always been a constant shift and change towards that which serves me best. I kind of can't help it. Like, I have to get to the truth of it. And so that means at various points I end up being in certain places and being part of certain communities and adopting certain practices that help me in those years. And then at some point I begin to question those, and no one way of practicing can really satisfy all those itches. And so I kind of would seek out other things or just change and adapt across the years to do what worked for me. So I've always had this kind of morphing, changing approach to my own spirituality, and even within the communities I've been part of, I've been like an instigator of trying to push things beyond the tradition or what's comfortable in that moment.
I only know what I know. I grew up in the US with the very American evangelical flavor. What I hear so much in what you're saying is like just this real trust in self and trust in sort of connection to the divine and trusting how that's expanding and folding. And I think trust is what has been such a hard thing for me to like become in right relationship with, if you will, because I was so conditioned into the original sin, and you're a pile of shit that Jesus had to come die for, and like you can't trust anything of the flesh and all of those things. So I'm curious, like, was trusting yourself and your own instincts and intuition, was that ever a challenge, or was that something that has felt really like flowy for you throughout this process.
No, it's been incredibly difficult the entire time, and I feel it almost exclusively as suffering. And it's been always been difficult. I haven't been able to help it though. Like I have not known another way of being, and so I've just always done it. But no, incredibly difficult the entire time. And I would say, like, I think there is more leeway within the church in the UK. I think the cultural pressure isn't so heavy as it is here. Like, because if you enter into church life, or you're born into church life in America, it is like an entire culture that dominates, your political, financial, all your social relationships. It's everything. Whereas in the UK, it's not quite as pervasive as that. There are elements of that. There are elements that can feel quite oppressive, and, you can feel like a cage. But generally, you have more room to have your own life within that. There are very specific things to Britain with class that don't really exist here, that it makes it very different. But there's definitely a little more room for you to be yourself, I think, in the UK. But that trusting of myself is just a constant thing that I'm still having to develop now, and I still work out in therapy in my own practices now. Like, even though I've done it, you'd think by now that the next step would be, not so intimidating, but it always is. Like, the next step is always the difficult one. And so, it continues to be hard. Yeah.
Yeah. I noticed, and I don't know, if you would agree with this, but I feel like I've noticed in your poetry some themes around like enoughness and themes like around community and connection.
Yeah.
And I wonder if how trust plays into those themes at all, or if you feel like they do.
Trust is everything. Trust is the currency that we exist on as human beings. Trust in ourselves, trust in each other, trust in God. Without that, we don't have anything really. Like, we are utterly alone. And so, I won't say always, but for a long time, as long as I can remember, I viewed trust as currency. And so whenever I've been granted trust by other people, or I gain trust in myself, or I find a stream of trust in God or in something, I then try and spend that. So I then try and use it to move forward and develop and deepen relationships and deepen my own experiences, and push faith forward in whatever ways that means. So yeah, trust, I think, is everything really, like in terms of how faith functions. I think faith and trust are just so linked.
As you're sharing about your relationship with trust, I think of like a question, and I will probably reference this in like every conversation that I have. That question of how do I trust myself? That there is this just such like skepticism maybe of our own intuition when we're sort of conditioned in this way of wisdom and knowing exist outside of you, not inside of you. And so I'm wondering if you have any like felt sense when you land in that place of trust. Like, how do you even know that that's happening? Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. For me, it was realizing that in all of this stuff with faith, I think so many of us who were given a faith as children or developed a faith in teen years or early 20s or whatever, and we were given a faith, like a doctrine, a theology, a way of practicing faith. Like, whenever you're given that, it's presented to you as like, this is the way, and this is how you should go, and like, this is what you should follow, this is what you should believe, and this is what you should adhere your life to. And so I think for a long time, we just go around thinking that that's what I'm doing. I'm trying to do this, I'm trying to do that, I'm trying to adhere my life to that. But the reality is that you are never doing that. You are always only ever trusting yourself. And so there is actually no other way of being. And so the truth that you're trusting in those moments is, I believe that this is the right thing to do, therefore I'm doing it. You are trusting yourself by sticking to your tradition and sticking to your religion, and it is an act of trust in yourself. And then once you realize that all I've ever done is trust myself, I just haven't been honest about that. I have removed myself from it by saying, oh, this is the right way and I'm just following the right way, rather than I'm actually just trusting my current opinion and reality. And you realize that you've always been doing that, and just being truly honest with yourself that that's what you have been doing, and that you have been doing it according to your feelings, but you've probably been justifying it through theological language and commitment to various communal activities. You justify all of your emotional decisions within faith through some other spiritualized language or theological language, and you realize that I have only ever been doing what I wanted to do. So now what do I really want to do? And so then for me, the real work comes in the business of desire. So like a lot of people do not know what they want in life. It is a really difficult work to work out what you want. It's an even harder work to work out why you want it. And so I think those two things are the key to really unlocking true trust in yourself, is to work out what you really want, and then to work out why you want it. Like, what are you hoping that it will bring you? Like, what is the underlying primal motivations behind that? And what came from you and what came from others. So I've been really influenced by the work of René Girard with mimetic desire. He talks about almost all our desires are either inherited or actually adopted and stolen from other people. We just look around us and that's how we decide what we want, because we just see what other people want and then adopt that. And so realizing that you've done that for most of your life, then you can begin the work of working out like what's really driving you and why. And I think once you really do that work of desire, then you begin to unlock like real trust. Yeah. And knowing that your desires are okay and are blessed and are holy, claiming that and reclaiming it.
Okay, this is reminding me, of course what you're saying is you are reminding me of one of your poems, because you are the author of your poems. But can I read?
Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to read two, because I feel like they're both resonant with what you're saying. So one, you posted, I think recently, February. A body is not an object. It is an experience, one you're allowed to enjoy. Yeah. And I feel like that enjoyment, I'm just curious about maybe that connection you might see between enjoyment and desire. Do those feel similar, different?
I think desire is a much bigger concept than enjoyment and pleasure, but enjoyment and pleasure are part of desire. And so I think if you are being really true and honest in regards to your own desire and desires, you will end up having more enjoyment and pleasure.
Yeah.
But they're not the same thing. Desire is so much bigger than enjoyment and pleasure. But I think if you truly pursue your desire, you're going to end up enjoying things.
Sure, enjoying things along the way. Okay, this other one that I really loved. Remember, you are dust, and to dust you shall return. However, it is stardust, so it's okay to sparkle a little before you go. Mm-hmm. Can you tell me maybe a little bit about how this came to you, or what you were wanting to communicate through that?
Yeah, it came from Ash Wednesday thoughts, and so it's such a. I've always loved the Ash Wednesday practice of remembering you are dust, and to dust you shall return. I love, and I'm very drawn to anything that reminds us of our impermanence, and I think it's such an important thing to consider regularly in order to receive life to the full. And I think the only way to truly live is to totally embrace death. And so I'm always trying to find the juxtaposition between those themes. And so often when I'm writing about like positive things, I will just include a little note of death in there, just because it feels true to me. Like it just feels like that's how you truly understand what it is to have life to the full. Is, you know, and I think, and I get that from Jesus, you know, like how do you gain your life? You gain it by losing it. And so I'm always trying to add those notes in. And so that poem Stardust is the opposite. So it's an Ash Wednesday post where I'm thinking about death, but then I'm also wanting to include this note of it's okay to actually enjoy this life and sparkle and thrive and shine while you're here. Like that, the one should lead to the other, I think. And so I'm always trying to marry those two concepts in ways that don't feel teachy and preachy, and like I'm always just trying to explore the feeling of it, you know?
Yeah. Well, and it feels, we're both 4s, right, on the Enneagram?
Oh, I'm a 4 with a wing 4, yeah.
Because this all feels very 4, which I mean is
good. It's the best.
I love the confidence.
Me, but also you.
I can appreciate that confidence because I'm always like, oh God, why am I this way? But I'm gonna channel you and your belief and excitement of our 4ness. But I think what I was thinking or saying is like that maybe part of my almost resistance to my own 4 energy. And for those of you that aren't familiar with the Enneagram, you can Google it, but like 4s are kind of the melancholy is often how we can be described. I grew up in my feet in a lot of different spiritual worlds, but I went to a very evangelical school where I would say had a like rule 7 energy. You know, there were definitely youth pastors doing backflips on the stage. It was like, and I did always feel this sort of this awareness of this sort of the death and the resurrection in a world that in a context that felt like it only ever wanted to celebrate the resurrection. And this does feel like this poem specifically feels like that tension in a way that just feels really, really balanced, in a way that actually feels much more interesting than I mean, God bless the 7s in the world. We need them. I need them. I am partnered to a 7 and I need that energy in my life. But it doesn't always feel complete. When I read this, I thought of, I don't know if you listened to Switchfoot growing up like I did.
Yeah, I did, yeah.
Okay. John Foreman, he has like a lyric, "The shadow proves the sunshine," which is just like so simple, and yet just I remember hearing it for the first time, and you know when those things just land in the body, you're like, oh my God, yes. Yeah,
I wrote a line recently about what is the shadow but the sun hitting my body, and a similar thing, yeah.
Gosh darn it, that's so good. Oh wait, say it again. Say it one more time.
What is a shadow but the sun hitting my body? It's something like that. I might have paraphrased it a bit, but
that should be it. That is it. I almost like feel compelled to invite people, and myself included, to actually, because when you said that, I feel the sun. We mentioned you mentioned. Maybe before we started the conversation, you're from the UK. I'm here in Seattle, and the sun is a treasure.
Yeah, it's a stranger.
Yeah, it's a stranger. And
I lived in Northern Ireland for 3 years, and it rains 300 days a year there, and so
does it really?
I know what it's like to live without the sun, but then I've also lived in Florida, right? And so I know what it's like to live with permanent sun, and I would choose the gray.
Dude, you're speaking my language. I lived in San Diego for 10 years. And people are always like, oh, do you miss San Diego? Now that I'm back in Seattle, I'm like, I really don't. Like, I really don't. There's something, and this is maybe just the 4s in us, but like, there is something so unnatural about sun every single day.
Yeah, permanent sunshine is just it's a strange thing. It's addictive, I think, too. I think a lot of the people there are incredibly addicted to it. That's why I've settled in North Carolina, because we get 4 seasons.
I could go for 4 seasons. We really kind of, I feel like we have like 2, maybe 3.
Yeah.
It's mostly just rain or no rain.
Yeah.
Or gray or no gray. But I'm kind of jumping back in the conversation a little bit. But I feel like through some of this conversation, there's been references of kind of like your like practices that kind of reflect maybe what you need in that time, or where you're at in your relationship with the divine. I'm curious, like, are there any practices that are feeling particularly supportive or potent to you right now?
2, I would say. One is, and this has been something that has always been important to me, but has become, actually both of these things have always been important to me, but have become totally essential to my spiritual practice. And the first is to eat with friends and drink. And that's not a revelation, like I think a lot of people have that kind of table mentality, and there's a lot of talk about that, but it becoming not just something that's important, but really the primary gift of life, communally. And so that's like everything to me in terms of my spiritual practice. And inevitably, just the way I'm wired is that this is more of our fourness, is like I'm trying to always make the conversation deep and philosophical and spiritual, and really get to the heart of people and finding out about their desires and their inner worlds. I'm fascinated by individuals' inner worlds. So that's first practice, and the second is art and creativity. And so art and creativity, not just as an overflow of something spiritual or something meaningful, but like my central rooted practice of spirituality is to create as much as I am able. And so I have spent the last 3 years particularly shaping my life in ways that allow me to create as much as I can. And that's difficult. I have 4 kids and, like a homestead and various responsibilities in my life. And but I have prioritized the creative practice above all of it. And that feels very, very terrible to say, growing up as, in the church, where you're told, particularly as a man, that you have to be, the father and the husband, and what comes first is God, and then comes your wife, and then comes your kids, and everything else has to come after that. And I realized that's just all bullshit. And so I prioritize my creative practice above all, and that's where I encounter God, and that's where I express a spirituality personally. But then also that's what informs me as a father and as a husband too. I'm so much a better husband and father because I'm a poet.
Something I really appreciate about those 2 practices, or at least something I'm noticing in them, is that maybe some of the Christian conditioning, at least for myself, has been that like spiritual practices are a discipline and often involve suffering. So fasting or long silence and prayer, or disciplined reading of the Bible every day, which is not that there aren't like lovely things that can emerge from those, but but there is sort of this root of suffering and sacrifice in order to sort of receive holiness. And what I'm hearing in these 2 practices that feel particularly potent to you right now is like the practice of eating and drinking with people like you enjoy people. Like obviously relationships have all their own dynamics, difficult and easy, but there is a foundation of this is a practice that brings connection and enjoyment to you.
And I really do believe that suffering is probably the primarily way we do grow. Suffering and waiting, and I experience waiting as suffering. So the only ways I really grow are suffering. But I do not need to create any additional suffering in my life. plenty of it finds its way to my door every day.
Yes.
So like I do not need to enter practices of suffering. Like
Yes.
it's all around me.
Yes.
And if you're empathetic at all, you just turn on the news and you will enter into a world of suffering. And so I don't feel any need whatsoever to create scenarios of suffering or pseudo suffering in my spiritual life in order to grow. I just have so much around me. In terms of my spiritual practices, I think I was always leaning towards, but have really owned over the last few years, is I only do what I want. I only do what I want to do. And sometimes I want to do things that I think are going to be very, very, very difficult, but I want to do them. And then there's a desire and there's something. It's not about ease or convenience. I don't really think that those are the roads that I want to walk down. But desire has to be the road I walk down. Yeah, so all my spiritual practices come from that.
There's so much down that thought trail I want to go down, but first, I'd be curious if you have a working definition for desire, just since it has come up a lot. Yeah, what does that word mean to you?
I mean, for me, desire is so fundamental to the human experience that it is the very thing that drives us. It's like, for example, like when you have no desire in your life, you don't want to get up in the morning, you don't want to do anything, food just becomes something to sustain you, you have no enjoyment even in your favorite foods, all of your favorite activities you don't want to do, like it's depression, it's like real serious depression. And that really is often a total lack of desire. Like desire has been killed, quashed, got rid of, and so everything just becomes existing, and that's it. And so desire is so fundamental to our drive to it's our drives, basically, our want and will to do anything. So I use this term, an ecosystem of desire. Let's go down here. So
I'm ready.
There are two popular ways of thinking about desire that people tend to adopt. One of which is the religious sense of desire, which is that ultimately desire is bad and it has to be taken away. It has to be taken away through surrender, through not my will but yours. It's like the total removal of agency, the removal of desire and passion, in order that because it has a fundamentally damaging effect on human beings, like is the belief, right? And if you just did everything you wanted, it would lead to disaster, right? So that's the first interpretation. The second popular interpretation, which you might call a more secular or a hedonistic interpretation, is you should meet all of your desires. Like any desire you have, any impulse you have, any yearning for pleasure should be met. You should pursue it, do it. That's all that matters, is the pursual of your desire. But essentially, both of those practices are doing the same thing, which is they are both attempts to remove desire. One through purification and the other through fulfillment. The hedonistic urge is actually to remove desire by fulfilling it. So your desire is then gone because you fulfilled it. But we don't do well when all our desires are fulfilled. We slip into depression. When we it's like the people who get everything they want end up in a very similar place to those who get nothing that they want. What we have to develop and foster within ourselves is an ecosystem of desire, which is that desires come and they go. They last for periods of times. We have these longer, bigger, more fundamental desires in our life that kind of that can be more like seasons, like more than seasons, like decades of our life that shape directions of how we live and operate. And we have these smaller desires, these desires that come in seasons that come and go. And you might even have them within a day, like the desires come and go. But paying attention to how desire comes and goes, grieving that which is lost, welcoming that which is new, all part of a healthy practice, I think, of fostering an ecosystem of desire, which means pursuing some of those things, but also means killing them when they're killing you. It's basically mindfulness to who you are and what drives you at all times. Is that too much?
No, it seems like you've thought about this maybe a little bit.
No, I do. I think about this all the time, because I think it's what fundamentally drives all of us. Yeah. And when you realize that everyone's acting according to their desires, either trying to get rid of them or trying to fulfill them, and most people are not having a really healthy relationship with them.
The what it's bringing up in me as I kind of am sitting and thinking about all of the people that I sit with in spiritual direction, kind of the primary wound of fundamentalism is that robbing of agency. And this, what feels like you've just done this beautiful, you've painted this beautiful picture and journey of what it looks like to reclaim that agency through one's relationship with their own desire, which to me just feels really both amorphous and accessible at the same time.
Yeah. Well, something that I've witnessed in the people in my life, like I don't really describe myself as going through a deconstruction process, because I've always been on this tearing everything apart journey that I've been on, and constantly tearing apart and rebuilding. But a lot of my friends have been through a deconstruction process, right? So, and a huge part of that is realizing they never had any agency or desire, or that all their desires were kind of repressed or condemned in various ways. But what I often see is like a pendulum swing. You know, so like as soon as they get the first glimpses of agency, it's like, okay, I'm going to be a witch that just has sex with everyone, and like that's cool. You know, like I'm fine with that. But like in my experience is that those people eventually begin to realize is that those things weren't actually their desires either. They were reactions to not being allowed to have any agency or desire. Yeah. And so the real work of reconnecting with your true desire in life is actually quite a patient, gentle, delicate thing that takes time. And some of the discovery of that has to be the following those impulses. And I do that too, right? Like, so I discover what I don't want by getting things that I thought I wanted, right? Like, so it's human. This is human life. But I've certainly noticed that pattern in lots of my friends. And almost all of them come to a spot where they're like, they regress away from that hedonistic urge. And especially I know lots of people who either got married, you know, in their very early 20s and, you know, then have this middle-aged, you know, they get divorced and then they have this middle-aged urge to like live the childhood they didn't have, live the youth they didn't have, and party and do all that stuff. And I love to party, so I'm down. But it's a reaction from something negative. A lot of it is a reaction to those spiritual traumas rather than health. And I don't try and stop anyone doing that. Like I have no judgment in that regard. So go do what you got to do. But, you know, I have witnessed a moving away from hedonism as a viable form of living.
I don't know everyone that you're talking about. I have people in my mind, including myself, that I'm thinking of as you're sharing this sort of pattern, this reaction. But ultimately, like, there is space for all of that.
All of it.
You know?
All of it.
And those of us that come from that more fundamentalist background, there's this like such fear of fucking up. And so we didn't do any of that because the worst thing you can do is fuck up, whatever that means, you know? But that is, I mean, we maybe alluded to the suffering being the sort of catalyst or kind of pressure cooker for growth. It's like that too. It's like the fucking up is the bouncing off that wall and that kind of right sizing of that desire.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's an inevitable process. Like I think it's, as you said, there's just space for it all, and I don't judge any of it. Like I you know, reactions happen, you know, when things, you know, causality, and it's just, it is what it is, and it happens how it happens. But I don't think it's the goal. I don't think the goal is to to have every desire fulfilled. I think the goal needs to be to enter into a healthy relationship with all your desires.
I appreciate that invitation. I almost think of, I know you've referred to it as an ecosystem. The image that comes to my mind is a flowing river.
Yep.
Has movement, that has is new streams or creeks are kind of feeding into it, and there's this, I don't know, like a movement and a freshness sort of that comes when you're sort of attuning. If you're kind of laying there just letting it carry you, there's this symbiotic kind of relationship with where you find yourself.
And you need that. You need like the impulse and the romance of a new desire in your life every now and then. The excitement of something new is part living.
Yeah.
And I hope I'm experiencing that in my 80s, I hope I'm experiencing something new and romantic all the time. Yeah. And but also the death of desire and dreams you had that die, and obviously the older you get, the more dreams you have that die. And that's the flow, that's the ebb and tide of it. Yeah.
Yeah, that to me is a much more interesting spirituality. That's not the sort of 1, 2, 3 steps to arriving at this one right theology, but this ever expanding, ever changing, desires anew and desires dying. That is a much more interesting spirituality.
Yeah. And it's the one, I don't think it's even an option. I think that's just how it is. I think, I don't think I'm describing this is one way you could go. I'm describing, this is how it is for everyone. And so I'm not describing a way. I'm describing a reality. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I don't disagree with you. And I also feel compelled to allow anyone listening to disagree with you on that.
Oh, totally. It's other people's experiences might be something totally different.
How have you found these people that you're gathering around tables with? And by that, I mean just how have you found companions along the journey? Because I do think, or have found, that sometimes when you venture out of the mainstream of thought, being lonely can be part of that. But it sounds like you have been able to surround yourself with people, with community connection.
I would say I just tend to the relationships where I feel safe and I feel life. So whether they spring out of Christian community or not is irrelevant. Wherever I feel life, wherever I feel safe, wherever I feel this desire to sacrifice for others in the direction of love, I tend to those relationships. And so a lot of them are by phone and online, and but I really value the idea of place and being in the same place together and eating together. And so I make very deliberate attempts to foster those relationships here. I am very unapologetic about my own self and life and beliefs and practices, and so I tend to find people that have something that resonates with me. Not even the same. A lot of times it's very different, but just other people who are trying to live thoughtfully in this world and trying and who value relationships and who value friendships. And so wherever I find them is where I find them. I don't think there's one surefire way of doing that, but whenever you find that love and that spark, nurture it. Like tend to those relationships. Don't flake. I think that's such a huge thing for, I would say, our generation. Flaking out under the guise of self-care is something that I see a lot of, and I experience myself. I just want to stay at home and watch Netflix tonight. I don't want to go out and see people and stuff like that. Not that you can't ever do it ever, and that you can't, I've written about this as well. Like self-care is whatever you need in the moment. You basically do not want to look back on your life and not have developed your friendships. Like I just think that's the one thing you don't want to do. That's what everyone says on their deathbeds is like it's the friendships. That's the one thing you want to really attend to. And if you're going to be disciplined about anything in your life, make it your friendships. Like I think that's the only true discipline that I think you need to foster in a healthy spirituality is to tend to the friendships.
I'm sorry, I keep looping back around to sort of people that are maybe kind of in the deconstruction phase, even though maybe that's not exactly how you resonate, but that is often how the lens I see things through. And I think of how, through school through church, you have community just there. You don't have to have, the only discipline you have to have is that you maybe show up to something once a week. There's sort of that routine. And so I'm hearing is like, if that is not something that is like supportive, like church is not something that's supportive, small groups are not something that's supportive, then the discipline of curating those relationships and connections is something that falls on you, which might be unnatural for people who grew up in a place where community sort of spoon fed to them. Yes. And
it's a skill. It's a skill and a discipline that has to be learned over time. It took me, I was probably 35, 36 before I really understood that. You have to tend to those relationships. Absolutely.
Tending to the relationships. Yeah, it kind of brings me back to the presence and the mindfulness you talked about desire, also the presence and mindfulness when it comes to tending to those relationships, to noticing where you feel safe, where you feel life, where you feel energy, and attuning to that. Nice. It's a good word, David. Okay. Kind of wrapping things up here, where can people find you in this world? What are you up to these days? How can people connect?
Most people connect with me first on Instagram. So Instagram is where I exist at David Gate Poet.
Perfect.
And that's where I post work regularly. I also have a website, davidgatepoet.com, where you can read all of my stuff, but also buy. I do hand type prints, and you can buy those, or I do posters and stickers and things like that too. Nice. I have a Patreon newsletter, so patreon.com/davidgate. If you want to hear from me every week, direct to your inbox.
Whoa, every week. That is impressive discipline. Good job.
And I'm writing a book, and so that will come out, I would think, next year.
Amazing.
I can't give any details.
Wow, yet, what a tease.
But hopefully I'll be able to say something soon.
Okay, well, we can't wait. Well, yeah, we will follow you on all of those places so that you'll be the first to know about this book. I'm very excited. David, thank you for making time to connect and for sharing. I am sitting with your manifesto on desire. That is going to be unfolding in me for a while, but I'm just so grateful.
Good. Thank you. It's such a delight.
Thank you so much for tuning in to this episode of the Embodied Spirituality Podcast. I would love to invite you to like, subscribe, rate, leave a comment wherever it is that you listen to this podcast, whatever platform is your preferred platform. It does go a long way in ensuring the sustainability of this show. Also, if you want to learn more about my work as a somatic coach or a spiritual director, you can go to HaileyMitsui.com. That's HaileyMitsui.com, and learn more about my work, my programming, and how we might be able to partner together in the future. Thanks, and I'll see you soon.